All right. We're doing this. Really excited to have you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for joining. Thanks for making the drive down. For those who don't know, Corey Kossack.
Close enough.
Kossack.
It's Kossack.
Kossack.
But I always say I have much bigger fish to fry. So say it however you want. I'm
Corey Kossack. That shows the audience that Corey and I are not previous friends to doing this podcast. So we are getting to know each other real time, which
We're
is
new friends though.
We're new friends immediately. And yeah, really excited to have you and just learn from you and learn about your story today. So thanks. I think one of the things that I know to be true about you is that you're a fan of the All In podcast. So
I've made that pretty clear lately.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So we can, maybe we'll start out just talking about Sam Bankman-Fried, because that's been a hot topic on the All In podcast. No, we don't need to talk about him, but what a crazy just time that we are in right now. Like, how are you feeling about just life in general? Before we even talk about you or your story, how are you feeling about this time that we live in?
Well, it's pretty amazing because when you say the time that we're in right now, what I think of is the entirety of COVID to now.
Yeah.
And that 3-year stretch, which by the way is the entirety of Aspireship's existence, is in that window, right there in that window. It's like nothing I've ever experienced in my lifetime. And I know that economic cycles come and go and all these different things, but the sharp down, sharp up, and back down, and who knows what's next, is so wild. And for me, there was something about this that just, like, I think, I obviously I don't know you very well, but I heard a little bit about your story. And like you, I've continued to get back up and keep going and keep trying things. And as I found success, I keep going. And you get this sort of sense about yourself at sometimes like, hey, I know what the rules of the game are supposed to be. I know what the risks are, but that's not going to be me. Like, I'm going to beat all that stuff. I'm better than that. I'm invincible, without arrogance, but like you have some of that. And this period of time has humbled me in a crazy way about just understanding how small an individual is in the sum of everything that's out there and all the forces. So I have complicated feelings about life at the moment, but I'm grateful for everything, and it's a crazy time.
Well said. I mean, that last piece, being grateful, I think the world has gone through a lot, right? Like, I have my own individual problems, challenges. You have yours as well. But I think in perspective, like everybody is going through their own version of something very difficult, at any given time. And I think just being grateful, like you said, is such a underrated characteristic that we as humans can have. And I've found myself sort of counting my blessings lately, or just trying to find ways to be more grateful for the things that are going well and right, and even the things that are going bad, because I know ultimately what they're leading to. So really well said. One thing in my research is, like, according to your LinkedIn, you've just been like starting companies forever, for like 20 years. Like, how do you do that? Right? Because at some point some of these have been successful. Some of them have probably not, but you just keep doing them, right? Like, talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, so I started my very first one in my college dorm room. It was literally like the definition of a side hustle. In the beginning, I was selling DVDs and video games on eBay. Doesn't sound like much of a thing. It actually became quite a thing. Like, it was doing 7 figures a year.
Oh my gosh.
While I was in college.
Crazy.
And it just taught me how much I loved the process of building and figuring things out. And so that's where it started. And my ambitions grew larger. I wanted to do something more impactful. And I found out really early, I mean, I was maybe like 24 or something, when I figured out that if you're going to do this, anything, it's probably going to take you like 10 years to do one thing relatively well. And it's also going to be just as hard to do something big and very impactful that people actually care about as it is to do something that is not that big and not that impactful. So you might as well do the really good thing, the purposeful thing. And so I didn't know this at the time, but some number of years later, I figured out that I have a work-life thesis, as I call it. And that's that I want to help people who want to help themselves. That's the focus of any business I do, has to be oriented around that. And I was already doing this stuff. I just looked back at the pattern and I said, this is what these all have in common. So long story short, without taking you down the whole life story, through, I would say, age 24 to 29 was pretty much filled with, I don't have an idea or a business that I'm ready to pursue myself. So I'm going to go join startups. I was living in Arizona at the time. I'm going to join startups and I'm going to learn and I'm going to get opportunities and I'm just going to dive in and go do it. And I would say there was a good 3 to 4 years at least that was just like filled with total bullshit, where pretty much everything was not going anywhere. I took many steps back, financially and otherwise during that time, but I learned what not to do very quickly. And I learned a lot of hard lessons that most people don't learn until a lot later, if ever. Yeah. And then that part, because it wasn't mine, it was sort of like a break in a way, from starting up from nothing. And I kind of formulated my big thing that I wanted to do, and I set my mind to it, and then I did that, and then, kind of the rest is history from there.
Nice. Why don't we go through the 1 minute, I know it's going to be impossible, but I'll challenge you to do it anyways. Sure. The 1 minute life story, okay, from as early as you want until today. And then I think we'll spend time on certain parts of that life story that I think could be interesting to talk more about.
Sure. So you got some flavor of it already, so I'll take it from there. I decided that if we were going to have a successful life, I was engaged, or actually I was not engaged yet. I was intending to be engaged soon, convinced my girlfriend, now wife, to move to the Bay Area with me. Got a job at a startup there for a while, and bridged my way into starting a company. Started it, grew, sold it. I was in the SMB marketing space. Went through a string of 3 acquisitions with the same company in a period of 2.5 years. And then had the idea for Aspireship and said, hey, I got to walk away from the guaranteed stability and all this stuff that's here, and I got to go do this thing. And then along the way, I had 4 kids. And they are still very young and very, very active. And we moved back to Arizona almost 5 years ago now, and I'm just slugging my way through it.
What brought you back to AZ?
So when my last company was acquired, the parent company had an office here, and we were kind of like, I don't know that we need to do the Bay Area thing anymore. We were getting kind of exhausted from the commuting and all the other stuff. And so, we decided to do it, and it was a great decision.
Nice. Yeah, I want to talk about the differences at some point between Arizona and San Francisco on doing a startup. So I'll make a note of that. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So it appears, though, along your journey, there's some ventures that you did that you ended up sunsetting maybe a year or two in, and there's others that that didn't, the ones that you sunset, how did you know it was like just time to move on, right? Because sometimes as founders, we convince ourselves that we will not fail. We will just keep going no matter what. And it's like, even if there's no business there and the likelihood of success is zero, right? So there's this fine line between like knowing when to move on, but also never giving up. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I can say that in the very early days when I had my own little small businesses that I spun up, the biggest trigger for me was this is not big enough or impactful enough. So the juice won't be worth the squeeze.
Yep.
But in all cases, there was something there. Like whenever I did it myself, there was always a business there. It's just, is this the business? Do I want to dedicate this amount of time to it?
Yeah.
So I learned that early. In the things that I joined, where it was clear that like, hey, this isn't going anywhere or not enough for me. I think part of it was just necessity of seeing the path I was on and how I would start in a really great position, financially and otherwise, and then just deteriorate month after month after month for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And then go, okay, like, where's the end of the road with this? Like, how is this going to, end in a place that I'm going to be comfortable with? And so those were the things that did it. It was that, and then also just a desire for more, not just to be successful, but to do something that was going to be better than the thing that I was working on.
I think one of the beauties of not raising capital is what you just said, right? When you take investors' money, you can't really just walk away, right? I mean, technically, yes, but it's not that easy, right? So I think there's something very amazing about founders who bootstrap companies because it gives them the ultimate optionality to do what they want, even if that means walking away.
Yeah.
So the other thing that you talked about that I think is really interesting that we should discuss is you're a father and a husband, and you've done your most successful startups as a father and husband. What competitive advantage do you think you have being a husband and having a wife who's supportive that you can go home to at night and talk to about your startups and the woes that you're experiencing? Do you feel like it's a competitive advantage versus somebody who doesn't have that support mechanism?
I believe that there is a competitive advantage. I don't know how you benchmark the two. There's pros and cons to not having or not having. For me, the competitive advantage is there's nothing I fear more than letting my family down. And so I remember early in my career, I'd be afraid to make that call, make the ask, go for it, whatever it may be, for fear of either rejection or the person I'm talking to is not going to be happy with me. And at a certain point, you're just like, well, I have not providing for my family and not having happiness at home and whatever, versus some person on the other end of the line, thinks I'm an asshole.
Yeah.
Right. And hopefully not many people actually think I'm an asshole. But if it were to happen, I would take that, or take the, no, we don't want what you're selling, or no, we're not going to invest in the company, or whatever it may be. I'll take that any day over letting my family down.
Amazing. That's a really good one. I remember, I got rejected a lot in fundraising, like we all do, right? No matter how good you are, it's endless rejection. One of the investors told me that their reason for passing was they prefer to invest in founders who don't have families. And I was like, man, that's brutally honest. Thank you for the feedback. But like, I fully disagreed. And I think that day I was traveling, I think back from the Bay Area. And I got on the plane and I pulled my phone out and I recorded a video basically talking about the competitive advantage that we married founders have against founders who are not married, which is the support mechanism piece. I like your rationale too, though. Maybe better. It's really good. Like you can't let them down. You have no option but to be successful.
Yeah.
Really good. Can we talk about, before we talk about sort of everything that happened with your company where you went through several acquisitions, Frederick / MindBody / some other company. Yes. I want to talk about a question that I have, which is you've now been a startup CEO. You've been an acquisition CEO, meaning you were acquired by a company, maintain your position as CEO. And then you've been on the executive team of an acquiring company. So 3 distinct roles, but all that started as you being the founder. Talk to me about that. Like, what are the pros and cons? What are the differences? Which one do you prefer?
Yeah. It's brutal. It's one of those things that a lot of people who get acquired will talk about this, where they feel some guilt about saying negative things about it, because it was a blessing and it was financially good and their company survived and thrived and helped lots of customers and all this stuff. But the process of going from so which one do I prefer as being the founder?
Yeah.
Hands down.
Yeah.
Founder seat, that's it. But once you're acquired, you have to deal with this. If you're acquired and you stick around and you're planning to continue on the journey inside another company, you have to deal with the tug of war of, this is my thing, this is still mine, but it's not mine. Mm-hmm. And here are the things I want to do, but I can't do them. It doesn't fit in with what everyone else wants to do, or doesn't serve the narrative, or doesn't, I'm going to spend a year arguing for my ideas just to get one small thing done, whereas I used to just be able to do it. Yep. So it is very difficult. However, minus the financial side of acquisitions, I'm sure, as you can attest through some of your experiences, the things that you'll learn being inside those other organizations at the different stages, especially if you have a seat at the table because you have something strategically interesting. So in my case, we were strategically interesting from start to finish, the first acquisition through the third. And because of that, I got to go to board meetings, I got to go to executive meetings, I got to do a lot of things and talk to a lot of people. And that wasn't just an exposure thing. It was also learning financial discipline, metrics and things like that. Yep. The reporting level, I didn't have any of that prior to that. And so, it's very interesting, but it's frustrating and difficult at the same time.
Yeah. So is it fair to say the first, maybe big success you had was this company called Frederick?
Yeah.
When did you start that company? Where'd you get the idea to do this? Give us maybe the origin story of Frederick.
Yeah. So, again, we don't know each other well, but I keep saying you because there are some similarities. I've always had a desire to help entrepreneurs. And so I thought about some of this stuff, how could you do something that would be like rocket fuel for entrepreneurs that could scale and actually work? And I got to thinking about that and thought, this is just such a hard thing. There's just no one size fits all. The commonalities are really tough. Who else, go on brave journeys and do things against the grain that really need a lot of help and would have huge impact if we did. So small business owners, of course, was a thing, right? Especially people who love some kind of craft, whether it's something in wellness or massage, or they're a dentist or auto repair or whatever it is, where it's they learned how to do something and then now they just want to do that all the time, but they don't want to work for anyone, so they start their own business. Yeah. Little do they know what they're really getting into and all the stuff that's going to come with it. And so I had this idea, what if you could, I talked to a lot of people just in daily life. They would ask me very, very general questions about marketing, things that anybody in tech or anybody swirling around the space would be like, this is the most basic thing ever. But I was getting those questions all the time. And I thought to myself, this is an audience. What if you could turnkey something that would be like magic beans for a small business, where they just press a button and their sales go up. It's like, okay, well, how exactly would you do that? And so as I started looking and digging for this, I saw that most of these businesses, these local businesses that provide a service, hairstylists, spas, salons, yoga studios, auto repair shops, whatever, they traditionally, up until the last decade prior to this time, which was like 2014, they operated on pen and paper, books. They didn't have sophisticated software or systems to really capture the customer data and what was going on in the business, until things like MINDBODY and Booker and things in other verticals came out to move all of this into the cloud and really organize it. So it was the customer information and the schedules of all the service providers. And so I looked at that and I said, if you could peer into that system and know who's booking what, when they're booking, who they're booking with, why they're booking, how frequently they do it, all of that stuff. And then you could also look forward and see where there are pockets of availability that's perishable inventory that if you don't fill it, you'll never get it back. If you could do that, you would know more than the business owner would about what's going on day to day, like legitimately. And so if you could do that and then figure out what marketing to do to fill all the slots, it would be like gold for these businesses. And so that's what the idea was and how we executed it. We integrated with these systems, analyzed the data, and Frederick, who was the marketing AI, so to speak, figured out what marketing to do and just did it. And businesses were like, I can't believe this. I just like switched it on and then business.
What was it sounds like you found true product market fit at Frederick. What was that journey like? What was the roller coaster of trying to find product market fit? Curious, like what you tried before you got to sort of the end product, which was Frederick, which did work, which companies were willing to pay for and not leave.
Funny enough, there was no iterative cycle before product market fit. It was just more features and more robust stuff. However, there is a very interesting wrinkle to this whole thing. This was a very condensed time period. So I found my co-founder sometime in 2013. We were sort of moonlighting and kind of working on getting it together. And then it took us a good year to get functional enough that we could have something that people could conceivably pay for. And we launched around like January 2015 or so. The wrinkle was that it required the data inside these operating systems or management systems for SMBs. And you could think of it sort of analogous to Salesforce, right? So anybody who knows Salesforce knows, oh yeah, they have tons of integration partners. It's totally normal. You just tap into the API, get the data. And so we found some of these partners, or one or two that had them, and we started there. But it turned out very quickly that the other players in the industry, they didn't want you touching their data at all. They didn't want you integrating with their systems. They wanted to be the end-all, be-all for their customers. And so our whole plan of we're going to go and partner with all these systems and distribute in through them didn't really pan out, because instead we were getting cease and desist letters from the business management systems that are like, hey, don't talk to our customers, even though the customers were coming to us. And so long story short, we had a data problem, and the very first partner that we integrated with, I won't tell you who it is, we got instant product market fit. As soon as we got approved integration, we launched the integration and instantly had customers. And 2 weeks into it, they shut us down because they decided to launch a competing product. So they approved our access, but decided to launch a competing product and shut us off after we had basically banked everything on integrating with the system. And so I had to go through a process of, I only have months to live. We just proved that this thing works. And now the one thing that we took months to build the integration with is cutting us off. And the rest of the systems out there, for the most part, are telling us to go pound sand. And what do I do?
Sounds fun. So what'd you do?
So first and foremost, I muscled our way into a partnership with the company that shut us off. And then I tried to go partner with their competitor right after I partnered with them. And then the competitor bought us.
Amazing.
And yeah, it was quite the story. I was not looking to sell, but it became obvious that at that moment, that early in the game, and with some of the challenges that we had ahead, that was going to make sense. And I think we had at most $100,000 left in the bank when the acquisition closed.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, MindBody, I guess, was MindBody the initial acquirer, or was it
Booker was the initial acquirer, and then MindBody bought Booker.
Did a roll up of everything. Okay.
Yeah.
So MindBody is basically a CRM / system of record / everything for like health, wellness, fitness, salons, these
Things
types
like
of businesses.
Elements Massage, Orange Theory Fitness, and then mom and pop versions of all of this.
So I was excited to share this with you. I was a customer of MindBody. I was the capital partner behind a cryotherapy business here in Arizona, the first one ever in the East Valley.
Yeah.
We were a MindBody customer, and we upgraded to use Frederick for like a few $100 a month. So I've actually been a customer of Frederick, which is really hilarious.
I love it.
And it actually worked well, and we loved it. And MindBody was great too. It was, I think like most of these robust system of records, like way more than what you ever use, at least for us, and I'm sure for most customers. Yeah. But very familiar.
That's cool.
So let's talk about these acquisitions. So you guys would you call this acquisition, was it an acqui-hire? Was it a notch above an acqui-hire? How was the company thinking about it?
Yeah, so it was definitely not an acqui-hire, although I'm sure they were happy to get the talent, even though we were 5 people.
Yeah.
They saw the potential of the platform and wanted to go sell it into the base and beyond.
Yeah.
They had been trying to develop something similar for years, spent a lot of money, and they had a product and was out there.
Yeah.
But they're like, okay, so we put all this money into doing this, and then these 4 or 5
these
people
jerks
in like
with
no time,
with a small budget
built this amazing thing, and they raised $600,000 from investors. Like, how is this possible?
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, this makes sense. So that's how it went. But it was it was largely a stock deal.
Yeah.
And so it was taking a bet that combined they would be more valuable than independent. And that's especially as an entrepreneur, giving over control and all of that stuff, like that's a tough thing to do. I'd never done it before, but now that I have, I understand some things about it.
Yeah, there's got to be a lot of mutual faith that goes into that type of deal coming together for sure. So you're acquired by Booker, and they convince you to come and like run this thing, continue to run it as the CEO. What changed for the company after you were acquired? Like, did this give you unlimited instant access to a massive customer base? Was it everything you thought it was going to be, or like most acquisitions, was it very much not the case?
Yeah. The part that was like I thought it was going to be was the access to the customer base and the adoption of the customer base.
Yeah.
So it took a while, longer than, I don't remember how long, but it was some number of months before it ever even touched the customer base. And of course I'm sitting there like, what are we waiting for? Let's go, know? But once it did, it was like fire. So we went from less than 100 customers at the time of getting acquired to, I think it was 2,500 customers on Frederick specifically in like 24 months, maybe.
Insane.
So that was the big change, and it was cool, like all the companies you would want to get to and the type of customers and the instant feedback and all of that stuff and the warm introductions, all of that was really great. The part that was very different was, I think, in my mind, I had this, big strategic thing that was beyond just like selling our stuff to their customers.
Yeah.
And largely that was not, a big thing. And there was appetite for it, but not so much a bunch of resources or anything that was, largely more sophisticated than, all right, let's sell it to these customers. If you can kind of organically sell it and do integrations with other, types of partners, let's do that. But that was it. And then I think I did not, in my mind, it was like, okay, combined, to IPO in X amount of time or whatever. And so the actual exiting to MindBody of all companies was not what I thought was going to happen. Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting. Very interesting.
Was MindBody and Booker competitors at the time of the acquisition? And MindBody was how much bigger?
MindBody was, I would say, at least 5 times bigger. It was maybe like 8 to 10 times bigger.
Like what sort of scale? Like, are we talking like $1 billion in revenue? Are we talking hundreds of millions?
2,000 people and maybe 200 something million in revenue.
Yeah.
And, we had, we had very little revenue at Frederick when we were acquired. We were like 8 months in, to go to market. And, we became a huge chunk of Booker's overall revenue in that next 2 years, and a big part of the growth story. And MindBody wanted that among other things. So it really made the deal that much richer, and it was a good exit. But yeah, very, very different outcome than I was expecting at the time we did the initial deal.
That's such a like 1 in a million thing to happen, right? Your company gets acquired, and then shortly after that company gets acquired, like that, you just don't see that. How did the economics work for you in your deal, given that it was stock-based, given there was probably some sort of earn-out component as well, like in the second tranche?
Yeah. So the second one was the real exit event for me. So that's when it was all cash. Or a public company, it was a cash deal.
Yeah.
And then incentive to stay on. So the first one was like a little bump, and we were feeling good about it, and a little bit of relief and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then you were on the treadmill still, going to the next phase. The next one was the real exit, and then the question was, okay, what now? And so we integrated into the company and largely did the same thing that I did at Booker, but did at MindBody with a larger base and more verticals and more resources and things like that. And so, yeah, I think we went from the 2,500 customers to over 10,000 in like the next 9 months. So like it was a lot. And then Vista came in and took MindBody private for $2 billion in that same year.
I remember that. Yep.
So I was there through all of this stuff.
Insane.
And then I left shortly after to do Aspireship.
Amazing. This is probably a good point to transition to Aspireship. One thing I want to talk about before we get into it is you did your first company, Frederick, in the Bay Area. You're doing Aspireship now in Arizona. What are the major differences, and maybe even what are the pros and cons to doing a company in Arizona versus somewhere like San Francisco or New York?
I think initially, we moved to the Bay Area because I didn't think I could be successful here doing it. Certainly not having the credibility and the track record and all that stuff to be able to go and pull money from other places. So that was necessary for that reason, or at least I believed it was necessary. I didn't raise a lot of money from the Bay Area or anything like that for that startup. And our acquirer wasn't in the Bay Area. Like our customers weren't in the Bay Area. So most of the time in the Bay Area, I was in a WeWork.
Yeah.
Like this tiny little room is like smaller than this, with, 4 people. And, we paid thousands of dollars a month for that place.
Yeah.
But I think there was a sense of, back then, there weren't a lot of people or nearly as many people doing startups in Arizona. And I would go out to parties and things, as a young person, and it was like nobody could understand what I was doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just so foreign. And so in the Bay Area, it felt very welcoming because it's like, oh, yeah, this is what everybody's doing. But other than that, I don't really think... I certainly don't think it's necessary anymore. My rationale was, hey, I have this track record, I made connections. There's certainly a lot of people I met through other things in the Bay Area that became useful. But now you can kind of go and be anywhere and do that. I would say that being in Arizona, the biggest benefit is not having the large commute. I was driving an hour and a half each way to go into San Francisco because we lived in the suburbs.
Just to sit in a WeWork.
Yeah, just to sit in a WeWork. That's right. Because my co-founder lived in the city and just wanted to walk upstairs to work. And I said, okay. And that's where the engineers wanted to be and all that stuff. But beyond that benefit, like, people are just happier here. And you don't really grasp how important that is until you get it. Just walking around and seeing people smile, it's very, very different in the Bay Area. And then just the amount of stress there just wasn't a healthy thing that I wanted to be a part of anymore.
Amazing. Let's talk about Aspireship. Same thing, like, why and what do you want the world to know about Aspireship?
Sure. So I'll start with what Aspireship is, and then I'll talk about how I came to it. So it's a learning and talent platform. So the idea was, take people that want to make some type of change. Could be a functional change, like from marketing to sales, or sales to customer success, or whatever it may be. Or it could be an industry change, like insurance to tech, or anything, right? And provide a vehicle for them to learn about the career that they think they want, the job they think they want, the industry they think they want. And for them to validate that it's a good fit for them and that they have the aptitude for this role, and prove it to themselves, prove it to us as Aspireship. And then if they can do all of those things, then it will help them prove it to an employer who will hire them, who previously would not. And the reason that I came to this was there was a little bit of Booker, but I didn't see it yet. At MindBody, I was in the office here in Phoenix, and as an acquired founder, there was something about me. It was probably the fact that people thought I wouldn't tell their bosses or whatever about it, that people would just swing by my office and knock on the door and ask for 5 minutes to talk about their careers. And this started to happen at a clip that would just blow your mind. I mean, it was like every week there was 5 net new people coming by, from support, from sales, from marketing, it was mostly all non-technical stuff. And they all told me a version of the same story, which is, I'm 2 years, 5 years, 10 years into my career, and I feel completely stuck. I go, well, why is that? Well, I'm being judged based on the job that I have now or the job that I had before, as opposed to what I'm capable of. Meaning that if I'm a support person and I've done all the things that I need to do as a support person, and I'm ready for something else, they say, well, you can be a support manager, or you can go do this tangential thing, just, off to the left there. That's pretty similar, but tiny bit different. And that's pretty much your options. That's your life. And they're like, yeah, but I'm 26. I'm a smart person. I can do lots of things. Why do I have to do that? Because this was my first job or first few jobs or whatever. And nobody really has a good answer for it. I tried to help people They were looking to make these changes by making introductions, pulling strings, doing whatever. Internally and externally made no difference. A lot of nice people willing to take a little time, provide some guidance, but there wasn't really a path. Couldn't just take a Udemy course and then people would think like, hey, I'm going to go hire this person because they took a Udemy course. And I saw a lot of this with boot camps, for learning to code and stuff like that. Super expensive, laborious, time consuming, all of that. But not a lot of this for non-technical roles. And so I saw this, and I'm like, okay, if there's this much pain inside a growing tech company in a secondary market like Arizona, how much pain is there at the insurance company down the street or anything else where it's just not that attractive that people just fell into it? And so I kind of came to believe that this is a pervasive thing that's affecting the workforce, not just about tech, not just about sales, but all of the workforce. And at the same time, because I was an acquired founder, I got to go to a bunch of exec meetings and look at why we were or were not going to hit our, $50 million or $100 million target for the quarter. And every time it would come back to people stuff. They would say we have a headcount problem. And so the translation of that is we're not hiring fast enough, we're not ramping the people effectively enough, and our attrition is terrible. And so I asked myself why. And I believe that the two things were related, that we as a workforce, as a hiring group, have decided that a candidate's past jobs is the most important criteria for filtering whether or not they're qualified to be interviewed, let alone hired. And therefore, we're excluding the majority of the workforce who can do the job well.
Yep.
And so the idea was I could fix this if I could connect these two things and do so at a scale that would eclipse every boot camp on the planet. And so that became very attractive to me in the thesis of helping people who want to help themselves. And so we did it.
Really cool. The company HireView that I mentioned to you that I was at early in my career, we had this kind of shtick, which was that the resume is dead and like fully irrelevant and somebody applying for a job. And we would actually encourage employers not to ask the candidate for resume in the video interview, but to react based on the way that they answered the questions and what they said and these kind of things, right? So fully agree. Now, is Aspireship a marketplace where a candidate can come to Aspireship, put their like sort of profile together, and then you guys are matching them with companies? Or is it a SaaS where a company can use it and then internally like let people apply and go through that process?
It's a great question, and I'm smiling because we've done like every flavor of this and combined them all into one and all that kind of stuff. So the way that it works today is that candidates can come, anybody can come from around the world. They can come and they can start learning instantly right now. No application, no, big expensive upfront fees or any of that kind of stuff. And they go through, we have a number of different things, but the core stuff is like you pick a track that you want to be on, like sales or customer success or whatever, and you go through about 20 hours of on-demand work. You have to complete this 20 hours of on-demand work, and then you have to do an assessment. And that assessment isn't just like multiple choice stuff, it's like actual audio and video role plays.
Nice.
So this is not easy to just fake and pass.
Nice.
Right? You got to really know what you're doing and have absorbed the concepts and be able to take those and put them into practice in order to pass this thing. And so if you do all of that, you can earn a certification. And from there, you can do one of two things. You can take that certification, go out and tell the world like, hey, I graduated from Aspireship, and I think I'd be a great fit for your jobs, and you go out and you look for your own job. You can alternatively, or in parallel, which is what most people do, take part in our talent network. And so we built like a dating site behind the scenes, essentially, where we have a matching platform that matches employers with candidates based on what they're looking for, shows them video clips of the candidates introducing themselves, why they're making a pivot, some about their story, along with actual footage of them doing these role plays. And so the idea is that if you're a hiring manager and you look at this, you're seeing some of this stuff and getting drawn in to the candidate before you even look at the resume.
Yeah.
And so it is all of the above. It is that, and then companies can use it to train their internal teams as well.
Wow, that's a lot more robust than I thought it was. I didn't even realize there was this like program that people went through, and an assessment and a certificate and the whole deal. That's really amazing. I have some ideas I'll share with you after that I think could be cool. Awesome. How did you fund this company?
So because I had success the last time, I decided, hey, I'm going to immediately go raise money. So I had agreed with my wife after extensive negotiation that I would stay till my 1 year cliff at MINDBODY and not the many years after that were possible.
Wait, what side were you advocating for? Staying or leaving?
Oh, leaving. Yeah.
Okay, and she was thinking, well, maybe you should stay longer and get all the money.
You know the deal, right? When you're the spouse on the other end of all this craziness, you're like, finally, we don't have to deal with all this stuff anymore. Like, can you just stay there and be happy and like everything will just be good and our life will be perfect forever? And it was like, no, of course not. No, couldn't do that. So yeah, I negotiated that deal and got myself to move on at the 1 year mark. And so my last day was a Friday, and on Sunday evening I was on a plane to the Bay Area to raise money. And in the first month we raised $1.4 million in a pre-seed, and it was just me with an idea, like no team, no platform, no customers, just that. And it was just like, hey, it's you, and you did this thing before, so we're going to back you. And so that was the start. And then we've raised some additional money, $4 million in total to date, through various interesting little twists and turns the world has taken the last few years.
I'm sure. Have you planned on raising more money and struggled because of the market recently?
Yeah, so I think I've done this like 5 times already. So the fast version of this is we had just proven out. So we launched October of 2019. All right. And when you start something, the first thing is like, is this even going to work? Right? You have all these hypotheses, but you got to prove that it actually works. And in our case, we had a lot to prove, right? Most investors didn't believe that you could actually teach at an equivalent or better level than a boot camp that charges $10,000 or $30,000 and does it over many months of like hands-on, training, that you could just do this asynchronous on-demand thing and get as good or better results. So we had to prove that. So basically, people are going to actually take this thing, they're going to go through it, they're going to learn enough that they're going to be able to perform. And then on top of that, we have to go and convince companies that not only should they hire these people, they should pay us extra money for the privilege of hiring the people without the experience that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Sounds far-fetched, right? And so we had just proven this, on a small scale in February of 2020. And so I'm like, all right, it's time to go raise money. COVID, boom. Everything shuts down. Of course, my invincible nature says, I know everybody else is tucking their tail between their legs and they're not going to raise and they're going to go shut down. But you know what? I'm going to go do it anyway. Well, it didn't work. Talked to a lot of people and they're like, yeah, but what if nobody hires for like 2 years?
Yeah.
And
that was the state.
Yeah. And so that's what it was. And so we ended up taking more money from the investors that went in previously at not amazing terms. Yeah. Not because we needed it instantly, but because we had no idea what was going to happen. Yeah. And so since it was there, we took it. And so there was another like 800 something we raised then. And then, I went through multiple rounds of stuff after that. And each time it was always like, we done all the things, hit all the metrics, the numbers are big enough, all the stuff that's supposed to happen has happened. And still, we just struggled to get the big, the big A. And so that never came about. We were just getting ready to go and attempt that again. We had reached a pretty good level earlier this year.
Yeah.
And then, the market went through its thing and it was no longer a good time to raise. And so, yeah.
So how are you managing that now? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So it's challenging. So we've done a bunch of creative stuff to get this far. The biggest challenge for us was we were, the whole setup, right, is like 2020, no one's hiring. So we went almost the whole year, no revenue in 2020. And then 2021, it's the Great Resignation. Everybody's hiring, nobody's sticking around. And so we're on fire, right? And just growing like gangbusters and can't keep up, can't satiate the demand. Like we're landing much larger customers than we would have thought would be interested in working with us. And just all sorts of challenges, but good stuff. And then, go into 22 and like Q1 was, it was like 40% growth over Q4. It was like just bananas and going. And then, of course, the current stuff, started happening. And I didn't really listen a lot before COVID. I was kind of too hard-headed to listen to what could happen. And so this time I'm going, okay, I'm listening to this. And so I sort of, believed that all the stuff that ended up happening would happen. I just didn't think it would last quite this long.
Yep.
And so we've had to get creative and, we're dealing with not as heavy of demand as was there in the first half of the year.
Yep.
And then uncertainty about what comes next. And so that's been a very challenging thing to navigate, especially, not being at a point where, we can just sustain without capital.
Totally get it. It's, you already know this, but it's an incredible, one of the hardest markets to raise capital in ever in history right now. And it is crazy how the roller coaster has, driven the market the last couple of years around this. Cause you're right. Like 21 was like, there was money growing on trees. It was just like, who do you want to take money from? Right. Tons of flow. So, I want to ask you about something that you're involved in as a scout investor.
Sure.
And what is that? What does that even mean?
Sure. So Story Ventures, it's Jake and Brian Yormack. They're brothers, amazing guys. They were my lead investor for Aspireship.
Nice.
So I did not know them prior. I actually met them on a trip to New York when my round for the pre-seed was effectively full. And they're just so smart and so perceptive that they just knew they wanted to be in this, in our first in-person meeting. And so, they offered it, and that's how I was only trying to raise $1 million. We raised 1.4 because I allowed them to put in $400K.
Nice.
First pre-seed. And long story short, they've just been incredibly supportive and just really a joy to work with. And so they are seed investors. They started a scout program, which effectively means we're going to pick entrepreneurs, people that we trust, that are out there, that are seeing things that we're not seeing. And we're going to allow them to write checks, small checks into companies out of the fund's money, essentially. And basically the goal, I can write checks into things that they're not going to back if I want. But the goal, of course, is writing a check into something that they might actually lead around.
Yeah.
And so it's just a thing that I get to opportunistically do. And, if something moves me that I can do. And, there very likely will be a day where, I'm not the operator anymore.
Yeah.
And I may do this kind of stuff. And so it's a cool way to get some additional exposure to the other side of the table.
That is cool. Is that a common thing that venture funds are doing now, or is this sort of somewhat unique to them?
It's pretty common. In fact, I've met people, I think some of the really big funds, the marquee funds, they have scout programs. It's not something that everybody does, but they're certainly nowhere near the first to do it.
Yeah, it's amazing. So we're going to start to wrap this, and I just have a couple of more things. I have one more thing that I really want to ask you, which is, given your lifelong jaunt as an entrepreneur, what are some of the traits that you've seen and as a venture scout as well that are common among successful founders?
That's a good question. It's challenging to describe, really, because you need to, I think, be able to see things that are not obvious, right? Because a lot of great investors say that they see things that are not obvious, and they're looking at stuff that is so much further developed than when the entrepreneur conceives of it and can see how big it is and all that stuff. So that's something I think absolutely you have to be prepared for the failure, the failures along the way. Like, it is not going to just be a smooth ride. Even when it works really well, it's not a smooth ride. And so you have to be nimble and a listener, a data collector. That's actually something that I've said to my team at times. That, hey, I'm not grilling you on your job and whether or not I think you're good at it. I'm collecting data about what's going on.
Yeah. Because
I need that, because we're probably not right about how we're doing this.
Yeah.
And that's at all times. We're probably not right. So I think that kind of self-awareness is something, and just the ability to kind of stare the uncertainty in the face and manage to stay somewhat calm and keep carrying on. Those are all things. And then I got one more, and that is, you have to know what game you're playing. And this is something that I learned through the last set of things, including, the string of acquisitions, that a lot of founders now, they just think, hey, ultimate success is I just raise gobs of money. And they don't quite understand the implications of doing that.
Yeah.
It's not just the basics of I take money, therefore I'm responsible to people, therefore I have to do these other things. But if I take a mega round of funding and I don't multiply the business in a short order of time, I'm walking away with zero.
Yeah.
And so it's like quadrupling down at each round. Mm-hmm. And I don't think most founders get that yet.
Yeah. And I don't think most investors are willing to play that game anymore, at least right now and for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
You said something on LinkedIn that I kind of want to close with here, which was this principle of ask how you want things to go and then do that. I don't know if you remember this post, but it's I think that, I have something similar that I say, which is know what it is that you want to do and do that. And I think we're applying this to more of like if you're selling into a company or selling, like, ask them, like, what do you want? How do you want this to go? And they give you a response, and then you go and deliver it, right? So is there anything you want to add to that principle to close?
Yeah. So there's multiple facets to this. One is about setting expectations with a customer or something like that, and then actually understanding what they want instead of you jamming your process into what they're doing, which doesn't work. There's another piece that I think is actually even more important and relevant to this discussion about entrepreneurship, and that's understanding the end state of where you're trying to get to. And I was asked before by someone, like, how do you deal with the fear of failure or like the possibility that things don't work out with this. And I said, the thing for me is I look at the end state and I say, okay, what is the worst possible thing that can happen here? And am I okay with that outcome? Like, can I accept that outcome at any level? And if the answer is no, then I have to ask myself, what could I change about it or tweak or modify so that I could accept it? It may not be what I want, but I could accept it. And as long as there's a path there, that it's like, okay, I'm shooting for the moon, but if this silver lining thing happens, I'm okay.
Yeah.
That's how. And I think it's hard in the middle of it, because when you're emboldened and everything's going well, you're like, well, I want it to be the biggest thing on the planet, and I want it to be worth billions of dollars and impact millions of people and whatever. And then when you're struggling, you go, I just want everything to be okay.
Amazing advice. Thank you for joining. That was a very rapid 70 minutes that we had together. It's crazy how fast time flies when you're having fun. Thanks for being vulnerable and opening up and sharing your story.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Thank you for joining another episode of the Rollercoaster podcast with Corey Kossack. Really excited that he joined the podcast today. Hopefully you found it valuable. The key takeaways from today's podcast were there is an advantage to being a married founder. And so if you are married and or have kids and you're thinking about starting a company, don't let anybody convince you that there is not an advantage, because there is. Number 2, know when to hang it up when things maybe aren't going perfectly and or well, and there's a positive outcome in sight, but also toe the line of never giving up and being resilient. Number 3, see things that are, as founders, seeing things that are not obvious, being prepared for failure, being a good listener and a data collector, staying calm and knowing what game you're playing are critical things to being a successful founder. And so learn these things if you don't already have them. And if they're already part of your DNA, then double down on them. That's it for today's episode. Thank you for hopping on the roller coaster, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.